I want to thank everyone for joining Sharsheret today for an important conversation about the word survivor and the idea of survivorship. Yesterday was actually National Cancer Survivors Day, and today's program was designed to recognize that. Because by just being here today, we all have something to celebrate. No matter where we are in our cancer experience, no matter what we call ourselves, we can all celebrate the fact that we are here today, myself included. My name is Melissa Rosen, and I am the Director of Training and Education at Sharsheret. I am also a two-time cancer survivor. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to share. I want to thank our program partners on this important webinar, all fantastic organizations that we've worked with to accomplish our shared mission. Cancer Support Communities is a network of 175 locations, including cancer support communities and Gilda's clubs, that provide support to those impacted by cancer. Also partnering with us today are Barbells for Boobs, which works to redefine the standard of care in breast health and improve quality of life post-diagnosis, and Life Well Lived, which shares science, nutrition, lifestyle, and more to improve the lives of survivors. And of course, our event sponsors, without whom these programs would not be possible. Thank you to Merck, Novartis, and CGen. This webinar is being recorded like all of our webinars and will be posted on Sharsheret's website along with the transcript, but participants' faces and names will not be a part of that recording. In fact, though, for some, because of the nature of this conversation, it might feel private. Please remember that you can opt to choose to hide your image, your video, or even rename yourself on your Zoom square should you wish. All participants were muted upon entry. Please keep yourself on mute throughout the call. I do want to say that we received many important and insightful comments and questions ahead of today's program. Toward the end of the program, there will also be an opportunity to ask additional questions and any of today's presenters' questions. You can also share your thoughts and questions in the chat box as the program happens. As a reminder, Sharsheret has been providing telehealth services to the breast and ovarian cancer community for 20 years. And I heard somebody recently describe this as a time of creative connection. And I really do believe that's true. As we continue to provide the necessary support we always have, we found meaning in the creative ways we have connected with you all during the past year, almost year and a half. We truly are a community. A reminder that in addition to the many formal programs to help women and their families navigate the different cancer aspects, our clinical social workers are available for one-on-one support to answer questions, connect you to appropriate resources, help you process the emotions that often arise during the cancer experience, and so much more. And this is as good a time as any to remind you that Sharsheret's support does not end when active treatment ends. We provide support, resources, and guidance throughout survivorship, both immediate and long-term. And I want to remind you that our Thriving Again survivorship kit is a wonderful resource. And if you haven't ordered one, it would be a great opportunity to do so. It's all about living healthfully beyond cancer, both physically and emotionally. It comes with a gorgeous cookbook. It comes with exercise bands and so much more. And it's completely customized. In today's evaluation, you'll have the opportunity to request an order form. The kit, like all of our services, is 100% free. Okay, as we move into the webinar itself, I want to remind you that Sharsheret is a national non-for-profit cancer support and education organization and does not provide any medical advice or perform any medical procedures. The information provided by Sharsheret is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment for a specific medical condition. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat a health problem. As always, seek the advice of your physician or qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have. All right, let's get to it. I'm really excited about the format of today's program because it's a bit different than our past programs. So there are so many, when we talk about survivorship, so many things we could be talking about. We could talk about the transition from active treatment to survivorship. We could talk about the different types of healing that accompany survivorship. We could offer a medical presentation about healthcare after a cancer diagnosis. Today's webinar is a conversation about the idea of survivorship and even the word survivor, because neither of those, as you'll see today, are as simple as they appear. Today we have some wonderful Sharsheret callers, each with different cancer experiences, sharing their thoughts about those experiences and how that experience informed ideas regarding survivorship. We also have an amazing holistic therapist joining us to help us each concretize our own ideas about survivorship, which reminds me, please be sure to have a piece of paper and something to write with handy. But before we get to those presenters, let me, if you will, frame the conversation. As people who have experienced cancer, we know survivorship is not an easy endeavor. We want to think that the completion of treatment leaves us free and clear, solely a reason to celebrate a weight lifted, but it's hard, isn't it? We don't have a doctor or a nurse always available to address our concerns. The issue of long-term side effects and fear of recurrence weighs on us, and we have so much free time, right? All of a sudden, when treatment ends, all the time it took to get our infusions, to travel to our appointments, all of that time is ours again. Might feel scary. And of course, we've just gone through something traumatic. Every day was just about survival. Many of us didn't have the time, the energy, or the ability to address the larger issues that a diagnosis can bring on. And survivorship is actually often where that processing sometimes begins to occur, because we're not wired to take both physical and emotional hits at the same time. So we lead with the physical just to survive. We rally for surgery, chemo, and when that physical strain is complete, at least for the time being, it's time for us to address the emotional. But people around us may think, when it's done, it's done. We may begin to look better, maybe even healthy. We may have more energy. But our outsides don't necessarily match our insides. Friends and family think things will return back to normal, but we know the truth. There's a new normal and still an awful lot to process. We're still dealing with side effects, fears, and we're pulling our lives back together. It takes real effort. Relationships may have transformed, goals may have changed, and our priorities have likely shifted. All this turmoil, these changes, this transition, whatever you want to call it, can impact how we deal with survivorship, and even some basic questions about how we identify ourselves. So, are we already survivors? Were we while we were in active treatment? Or do we have to wait 5 years with no evidence of disease to call ourselves that? What about if we've been diagnosed with metastatic disease? Can we even use that word at all? And what about the word survivor? It's a word so many of us are proud to call our own, but for others, it doesn't resonate at all. I've heard people use the word thriver, the word warrior, the word fighter. I've heard people avoid those and say person with cancer. And I've even heard the word aliver being used. The point is that survivorship is complicated, and just as with everything, no two people are alike. We have 4 Sharsheret callers with us today who have generously agreed to share a bit of themselves with us today. Each one has a very different story, and their stories have impacted their post-treatment lives. Our first speaker is Yafa Leah, who was diagnosed with DCIS, which is sometimes known as stage 0 breast cancer. Yafilea, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for that introduction. I was diagnosed with breast cancer almost exactly 1 year ago. I turned 40 in April, scheduled my first mammogram, figured it would be routine and in and out, and immediately was suspicious and led to a very extensive workup. Every time they would do a diagnostic test to look more closely at something of concern, they would find more areas of concern. In the end, I ended up with 8 biopsies, 3 MRIs, and consultations with breast surgeons, plastic surgeons, radiation oncologists, and medical oncologists at 2 separate cancer centers. I wanted to make sure I was covering my bases. I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. So it took a while, and that's the process I went through for weeks. In the end, it was concluded pretty much almost unanimously that I had multiple areas in one breast of what was likely DCIS. Although they did say they couldn't guarantee that until they actually got in there and got the full pathology on it. But they also found multiple potentially problematic areas in the other breast. And so they told me that I was likely going to be dealing with this for a while unless I, so to speak, dealt with it all at once. I was given a variety of treatment options to choose from. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm somewhat of a control freak and an obsessive planner and researcher, and I have lists out the wazoo. So I agonized for weeks on end about what to do. I spoke at length with women who had experienced all of my options. I spent hours on the phone with my doctors. I read medical literature extensively on all the statistics regarding recurrence. I do have a medical background. I used to practice as a PA, and my husband is a physician, so we felt very comfortable doing a lot of our own research. And ultimately, I chose to have a bilateral mastectomy based on my pathology and my personal risk factors and everything that they had found thus far. I chose to go with deep flap reconstruction, which is an intense procedure with a longer recovery time, but much better long-term results. So after many weeks of stress and tears, I finally felt at peace with my plan going forward. That is until I was thrown yet another curveball. An abdominal angiography that was done in preparation for the deep flap, for the first stage of the deep flap, showed that I had a venous malformation in my abdomen sitting right on the artery that they would need to be grafting as part of the deep flap. And this venous malformation is a cluster of blood vessels, which put me at great risk of bleeding out on the operating table. And so my surgeons all met for a few hours one Friday night, and they spoke for a while with each other and with the radiologists and looked extensively at the scans. And finally, they concluded that in their 40 plus years of deep flap reconstruction experience, they had never seen anything like it. And nobody wanted to touch me with a 10-foot pole. So they said, sorry, plan is canceled, back to the drawing board. So 3 days before my surgery, we changed the plan to implant-based reconstruction with fat grafting. My surgeons also warned me that until they got the results back from the sentinel node biopsy that they would do at the time of the mastectomy, that they couldn't tell me for sure if I would be officially cured with just surgery. If the nodes were positive, I would definitely need radiation and 5 to 10 years of tamoxifen, a hormone blocker, and possibly chemotherapy. But thank God the nodes were clear, and my final diagnosis ended up being DCIS, aka stage 0 cancer. So in the days following my first surgery, a good friend sent me a gift of a customized keychain that she had made for me. And on one side, it had my name, and on the other side, it had a pink ribbon and the word survivor on it. And that was the first time I really thought about the term survivor. I'd been so caught up in the whole diagnostic process and forming the treatment plan that I was just in the moment, and I really hadn't thought about what came after. And I knew that I was incredibly fortunate that the cancer was found early and that I was able to be cured by surgery alone. But the keychain got me thinking, was I really a cancer survivor? Did I really earn that term? I didn't have to deal with radiation burns or fatigue or suffer through chemo or lose my hair. I ultimately didn't even have to take tamoxifen because of my choice to be extra aggressive and remove both breasts. I know countless women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, and everyone's course of treatment is different. So, how does one earn this title of survivor? Do they only earn it by checking every single box? My cancer was caught before it had even invaded the rest of my body. So, was I really allowed to call myself a survivor? But eventually I came to realize that for me, survivorship was twofold. Yes, I did everything in my power to eradicate the cancer that was in my body and survive that medical diagnosis. But I also faced tremendous adversity and I overcame that. I had the most difficult year of my life as I faced the diagnosis and the roller coaster that came with it. I navigated my way through an ocean of stress and anxiety. I lost both my breasts and I'm dealing with the lifelong physical and emotional ramifications that came with that. I've had 3 major surgeries in the last year. I'm likely facing another one in the fall. I probably will have to have more surgeries as I potentially have to replace my implants every decade. I've had 9 months of physical therapy due to complications from scarring. I literally was just discharged from that last Thursday. So suddenly I have all this extra time on my hands. And I'm going to have to be monitored for the rest of my life for recurrence. Cancer created a huge upheaval in my life and caused me tremendous physical and emotional pain, but I overcame it. I continue to overcome it every day. Yes, I did everything I could to deal with the cancer itself and close the chapter, but cancer is not a book that can ever be closed permanently. I'll always worry that I'm going to have a recurrence, but I know if that day ever actually does come, I know that the fight will be so much greater, but I know I can do it because I am a survivor. I have the physical scars to prove my battle and my survivorship, but I also have the invisible scars, the mental and emotional scarring. And boy, has that made me tougher. I proved to myself, and I continue to do so, that I can survive. But I'm not just surviving, as Melissa said, I'm thriving. And I plan to continue to do so every day for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Amazing. Yafalea, thank you so much for sharing that story. Your ideas about survivorship are really very insightful.
Thank you.
Our second presenter today is Danielle. Danielle was diagnosed with ovarian cancer recently and is at the start of her survivorship experience.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so I was diagnosed in March, or actually February of 2020, and then had my surgery March 16th, right at the start of COVID, and went through 6 rounds of carbo and Taxol, and I completed my 6 rounds in August. For me, at that point of time, it was like I was diagnosed. It was like surgery. Let's just do it. Surgery, get through chemo. Like I could do this, let me just make it to the end of chemo and everything's going to be like, okay. Except that once I got my last day of chemo, I was expecting to feel like this enlightenment of like, okay, I can go on with the rest of, my life. But it wasn't like that. As Melissa was saying in the beginning, and I really connect with that, is that I was pushing, and I just kept wanting to get to the next step, that I wasn't going or processing any of what that actually meant. So then after chemo, I had to deal with the emotional side of things. And for me, everyone said, you know what? It's harder than chemo. After chemo, it's harder. And I kept saying, I just don't believe you. How could it not be? Like chemo was so hard and so devastating on your emotional and physical being. But now, once going through that, I understood what they meant. I had to kind of deal with what it all meant. I had all these unresolved feelings of, will this come back? when will it come back? How much time do I have? And you don't trust your body. Every little ache or every little pain, you think the cancer is coming back. And it's this constant feeling every day you wake up and you're like, think about it. It's hard not to. So then thinking about the idea of survivorship and what it means really kind of confused me. And I had a lot of trouble identifying with it because I was thinking to myself, have I really survived cancer? I feel like I'm kind of like in this like holding pattern of like wait and see. So I'm not sure if this really feels like I've survived cancer. I'm in the moment. And then I'm thinking, am I a cancer thriver? To me, someone who is thriving is someone who is growing. And then I think to myself, well, maybe I'm growing as a person through this experience. I don't know. I envision someone who is a thriver as someone who is getting stronger emotionally and physically. And I'm thinking that maybe I'm a little bit too close to the anxiety of all that kind of cancer and treatment brings. And that maybe with time, I can call myself a survivor or a thriver. But for right now, I kind of see it as I take it day by day, blood test to blood test, scan to scan, and just trying to make myself stronger physically and emotionally. But for now, I feel like I'm just kind of at the start of what we call this as our cancer journey. So that is where I am.
Danielle,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Sometimes when you're so close, it's a little hard to do, but clearly you've given this some thought and have some real insight to it. So thank you for sharing your story. Okay, I know with each of my cancer experiences that it was incredibly comforting and almost empowering even to hear others' stories. It can sometimes even help us process our own experiences, but it can't be the only thing we rely on to do so. So before we hear thoughts from additional callers, we have a unique opportunity. Joining us today from Tel Aviv is Kayla Rosen. Kayla is a social worker, a Jewish meditation guide, and a holistic therapist. She is joining us today to share some ideas on how we frame our cancer experiences once we've entered that period that we sometimes call survivorship. Kayla will speak briefly and provide us with the tools, or all the tools except for the pen and paper, to spend a short 4 to 5 minutes doing some free-flowing writing. One note though, before I turn it over to her, if you're not comfortable for whatever reason writing, please take the next few moments to think about the ideas that Kayla presents. And after the writing, we will join back together to finish this very important conversation. Kayla, the screen is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me and being here. It's really an honor to be a part and among so many strong and brave and powerful women. And as Melissa and as Yafalea and Danielle all spoke about survivorship, the identity of survivorship is obviously extremely complex and nuanced. And we are going to go into a journaling exercise to dive in a little bit more into that. But let's take a step back and look at identity in general as a human. So as humans, our sense of self is always expanding. We are developing parts of ourselves. We are taking on new titles, new identities. And every day when external things happen to us and internal changes happen to us, we are adding in new things and creating new parts of our identities. And we're also getting rid of old things that don't align with us anymore. And often from day to day, we're actually flowing in and out of different parts of ourselves or different identities within ourselves. And our sense of self is so dynamic, it's flowing, it's changing, and it should be. It's actually what makes us human. A single person is comprised of so many inner parts, each with different titles, different emotions, different thoughts. And sometimes these different parts can actually be really opposing one another, almost contradictory. We may feel rage and love at the same time, or hope and fear. One part of us might be telling us to do something wholeheartedly, and another part might be screaming at us, telling us, do not do that. But these are the moving parts of our inner world. And it's so important to acknowledge how natural this is, how this is exactly what makes us human. And more so, we should actually celebrate it. But often, for every human being, what happens at certain points is when we encounter parts of ourselves that don't seem to fit in with who we think we are, we often reject them. We learn to push them away, run away from them. Sometimes a new part or a new emotion or identity can bring up feelings that are pretty uncomfortable and we don't want to sit with, we don't want to face. Sometimes a new part of us contradicts what we previously thought we are, and that's really hard for us to integrate and bring in, because as humans, we really like things to be crisp, and clear, and clean. We love the simplicity of black and white. We love being able to say, I am this and I am not that. It's easier, it's simple. But I want to challenge that for a moment. And I want to ask ourselves, what if we were all of it? Just as we can be a mother and a daughter simultaneously, a friend and an employee at the same time, a patient and a thriver. What if we can be all of those simultaneously and let them coexist within us? Because they're all equally true at the same time. What if you could let yourself be a patient, a survivor, a fighter, and also a thriver? What if you could let yourself be a cancer patient and a mother and a partner and a friend all at once? What if we gave ourselves permission to be all of us, to express each and every part that needs to be seen and heard? And so instead of choosing one, we can learn to take every single part and integrate it and allow it to become part of who we are, and take it in as part of ourselves. And that's actually how we become whole. That's how we become that full person, that full sense of self. When we take each part, the beautiful and the ugly, when we take the fearless and the fearful, and we fully accept and love each part. And when we step into this wholeness, it's actually where we find our strength. We're able to stand really sturdy on who we are, because every part of us has a space to be heard, a space to be seen and accepted and loved, no matter how painful, no matter how dark, no matter how amazing it is. Because every part of us deserves a place to be seen. Every part of us is us. And it's in this space of strength and wholeness that we actually begin to heal, because we are taking the different parts of ourselves and we're learning how to integrate them into our full sense of self, our whole self. We no longer have to spend energy hiding, running away, pushing away parts that might feel uncomfortable. It might be difficult to bring them in. It might be painful. But we're learning to love and accept every aspect of ourselves. And we do find so much strength and healing in that. And we need to learn to celebrate that. So we're going to go into a journaling exercise right now, because one way that we can actually learn how to integrate these parts and love every part is by creating a dialogue with the different parts inside of us and starting a conversation. So we're going to do that right now with writing. So if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes for a few seconds, leave them open, and just think to yourselves about a part of yourself that might be a little bit difficult to accept, a part that maybe you have been putting off to the side. It could be an emotion, a specific emotion, or a title. It could be another version of yourself, whether at a different age or in a different experience in life. So take a moment to find that part of you. And we're going to go into this journaling exercise for around 5 minutes. And we're going to be writing letters. So we have two options. You can choose one and maybe save one for later, or if you can get both done now. The first option is writing a letter from this part of yourself, this part that maybe is a little bit on the outside, a little bit not seen, a little bit not heard. This part can write a letter to you. What does she have to say to you? How does she feel? Who is she? What's her name? Just give her space to talk to you, to hear who she is. And the other option is writing a letter from yourself to this part of you. What do you have to say to her? How can you love her just a little bit more? So we're going to take 5 minutes now to do that.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I will give you a 1-minute warning, but when we're winding down, but please take some time to either think or write about some of the really intriguing things that Kayla has presented. We have just over 1 more minute. Okay, finish the thought you're working on. Wow, that was amazing. I wrote too and was actually surprised at what came from my pen. For those interested, Kayla will share one more writing prompt at the end of the webinar. So once we conclude, if this is something you found useful, you will have the opportunity to continue. I want to introduce the next caller. Henrietta was diagnosed with breast cancer 30 years ago. She has had a lot of time to hone her thoughts on survivorship. Henrietta, welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. I think I'm unmuted.
You're good.
Right. As Melissa said, I am a 32-year survivor. And as everybody else has said earlier, what does the word survivor mean? To me, it means I came through whatever the illness or crisis was, and I'm here to fight another day and perhaps even another crisis. When I was diagnosed, I was age 47. The concept of and practice of breast removal with immediate reconstruction had just begun. It did not exist like it exists now. I was advised against that procedure by my general surgeon. He said, too much surgery at one time. I wish I'd chosen that route, and I would recommend that to anyone who's considering it now, since I ultimately went through at least 5 surgeries to get to the same result. Instead, I had a modified radical mastectomy on December 15th, 1989. And in 1990, I had a prophylactic mastectomy of the left breast. I chose chemo over radiation and lumpectomy because I did not want the risk of lymphedema in my dominant right arm. Like Yafalea, I was not a PA, but I have worked in the medical system for my entire career. I'm a speech language pathologist, and we deal with cancer of head and neck, so I was enough familiar with some of the consequences and the unintended consequences of both chemo and radiation. I did not want the lymphedema because it would have been in my dominant right arm, and I do everything with that arm. What I want to share is what it felt like when I finished my chemotherapy sessions. My chemo was given once per month for 6 months. It was very disruptive to my working and daily life because of the Ativan they gave to halt the nausea. I figured out how to deal with all of that, and I got through the 6 months as best as possible. What I didn't expect were the reactions that I had after those 6 months had passed. I remember sitting down in my office all alone, feeling very frightened and sad. While I was going through the chemo, I fortified myself to get through it, and it felt like I was fighting against the cancer. Now, how was I going to get through the anxiety of waiting 5 years to see if this was going to return? When I would go back to my oncologist, I would not even let him say hello until he read the numbers off of the 3 cancer tests. Every time something would come up, pains or bumps, etc., the fear would return. I had pain in my left lower back somewhere in 1992. So I went for an MRI. And the orthopedist said something appeared in the liver, and my current oncologist was ready to send me to the Moffitt Cancer Center for a bone marrow transplant. He was certain I was a goner. Instead, I chose to switch to a different oncologist. The second oncologist asked, if you have metastatic, okay, someone else say it. Metastatic cancer to the liver, how come your liver tests have been normal for the past 4 years? This was an obvious question, but not to the first doctor. And I will share something I didn't write here. I remember when this diagnosis came up, I sat down in the middle of my king-size bed. I looked up at the ceiling and I said, God, I know there's a lesson in here somewhere, but could I please have one semester off? Okay. The journey of breast cancer recovery is marked with lots of trauma, and not all of it is physical. As Kayla has said, as Dana has said, there is an emotional toll that impacts you as a patient, not only you, but your family and everyone who's connected to you. You begin to look at life in a different way. You have come face to face with a life-threatening illness. It is about the most serious trauma you can deal with, except for the loss, the death of someone very dear to you. Don't ignore the emotional impact. Acknowledge it, seek out ways to cope with it. In my opinion, it is even more important than the physical impact. In current times, we understand that mind and body are strongly connected, and that your mood, sense of well-being, and faith in return to good health impacts your physical recovery. I was fortunate. I had an excellent role model in my mother, who had survived a difficult journey through cervical cancer at age 45. I was all of 6 years old. While in the hospital, she dreamt that the angel of death was at her bedside. She pointed her finger at him and said, "You go away, I have 2 children to raise." And he went away. She survived that cancer, and then she had another one at age 67 because she had so many radiation treatments in the pelvic area for the cervical cancer that she then developed cancer of the sigmoid colon. Well, I was pregnant with my first child, and she was not going to miss that one. Mm-hmm. As I said above, I am now 32 years of survival. Every 5 years, I send a card to my general surgeon to let him know I'm still on the planet. I no longer think of myself as a cancer patient. I have been blessed not to have any metastasis, but I do consider myself a survivor. Someone has come through a very traumatic physical and mental crisis, strong enough to move on with my life. What I learned as a cancer patient and survivor has helped me deal with other crises in my life, and has also made me a better speech language pathologist because I can understand things from a patient side as I treat patients. As an after comment, my cancer treatment was in 89, my initial, and in 98, I had a triple bypass, and I'm still here. If I could get through the cancer journey to a place of survival, I can get through most anything else. That's it.
Henrietta, thank you so much. That was an empowering message. I love it. Thank you. So finally, our last speaker, Anne, was diagnosed recently with de novo breast cancer. De novo means that at the time of the diagnosis, her cancer had already spread and was metastatic. We learned right before we went live today that Anne can't be with us because she had a medical issue that needed to be addressed. And that really is the perfect example of the roller coaster that survivorship can bring. I think that some of the things that we think about when we think about the term survivor, with regard to those who are facing metastatic disease, is it's complicated. It's an ongoing experience. And sure, there are many times in that experience that people's lives go on as planned, and then maybe they'll have to step back out for some additional treatment before they can re-enter life. So for some in that situation, the word survivor doesn't feel right to them. Thriver is a word that's commonly used for people facing metastatic disease. but others, like I said, we're all different, and others do really embrace the term survivor. But what Henrietta said is very relevant here. If I can make it through that first experience, I can make it through. So I just want to say one more time how meaningful it has been to hear what our callers have shared. Thank you so much for your willingness. It is clear that while cancer is an experience that often has us feeling like we've lost control, words can help shape our experience, and choosing words that resonate with us can help us take back some of that control. And I think that from what we've heard today, that is very clear. We do have some time to take questions. If anybody has questions they'd like to put into the chat box, but we did get a few ahead of time that I'd like to share with you. One of them was actually not from someone who had dealt with cancer, but from a healthcare professional, and wanted to know the implication for mental health professionals for those treating survivors. I love that this question came in because it meant that there are doctors and mental health professionals and all sorts of people in the fields of oncology and healthcare in general that are working to enhance support for cancer survivors. And the one thing I would say is that it's easy to turn your attention to people who may need more help, maybe those who are in active treatment, but simply to remember that those making the transition away from active treatment are really at a complex point and need support as much as ever, if perhaps not more. And also that survivorship and healing is not linear. And so while somebody may appear to be doing well for months and even years, there could be a point where they might need extra support. I also want to point out to all the healthcare professionals who may be joining us today that Sharsheret has a survivorship training that addresses these kind of things specifically for healthcare professionals. And we are offering it on August 3rd. If you've signed up for this, you'll be on our website, you'll be on our mailing list, and you'll get information about that specifically. Somebody asked, do you consider your date, the date you got your diagnosis, the date you had your surgery, or the date you finished your survivorship date? And I think the great news here is we get to choose. One of the things that used to be was that survivorship was officially commenced 5 years after you've completed treatment and had no evidence of disease. But there's a much more modern and inclusive definition that the National Coalition of Cancer Survivors has put forth, and that is generally accepted among healthcare providers, which is anybody who's been impacted by cancer, whether during the diagnostic process, in treatment, post-treatment, in between treatments, can consider themselves a survivor. And so you get to choose what feels right to you. And I think that that is very important and very empowering. Okay, time for just one or two more questions. One of the questions was about, somebody actually shared, and I think this is really what was here spoken about today. When I think of the term survivor, I feel like a battle is won. When I think of the word thrive, I feel like someone is doing very well. But if you have a cancer that's metastasized and for the moment doesn't have a cure, I think of that as being a warrior. And the person who asked this question wants to know if that's how the medical field defines our conditions, or is it just survivor or patient? And my answer to that is it doesn't matter what the terms are within the medical profession. Sometimes healthcare professionals use words simply because that's what's been used in the past. And from speaking to people and knowing myself, some of those words can even be dehumanizing or feel dehumanizing. But when talking about ourselves, we use words that resonate with us, that empower us. It doesn't matter what anyone else uses. There were many other questions. I see some are coming in here. I want to take a quick look and pick one from here, but we will try and reach out to anyone who asked a question and get back to them. So actually, Suzette, thank you for this comment. She says that her own issue with the word survivor is personal, as she is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And she was able to deal with her cancer by remembering that her father survived Auschwitz. So yes, within the Jewish community specifically, survivor very often takes on a completely different meaning in relation to the Holocaust. And while people are dealing with something as difficult as cancer, it could be that that's not something they, even want a reminder of, another difficult collective experience, or it could be one gain strength from it. So that definitely resonates. Again, were many more things, and we're going to get back to everybody who asked a question, whether ahead of time or through the chat box. But for now, I want to thank Kayla Rosen for her fascinating insights, and to our callers for sharing their thoughts and experiences. I found this conversation fascinating, and as a survivor myself, really thought-provoking, and I hope you did as well. Once again, I want to thank our wonderful program partners on this important webinar, Cancer Support Communities, Gilda's Clubs, Barbells for Boobs, and Life Well Lived. And I want to recognize their shared goals and working together to support all those impacted by cancer. I want to thank our generous sponsors, Merck, Novartis, and CGen. And I want to thank all of you, all of the women and all of the men who have joined us today. Our conversation really focused on breast and ovarian cancer, because that's what Sharsheret focuses on. But the reality is this conversation will be, because of the recording, relevant to many other cancers, whether BRCA related cancers that we often talk about, or other cancers entirely. And that's important to keep in mind. Please take a moment to answer a poll on your screen. This is our evaluation. To fill out the brief evaluation survey that's linked in your chat box, or right there, right now. The evaluation provides the opportunity to request support, to request one of our free Thriving Again kits, or other resources. It asks about your interest in future topics related to survivorship. You can click that link now and still hear the end. One of the last things I want to do is invite Kayla back for a brief moment to share one final writing prompt for those of you who are interested in continuing writing. The prompt will also be placed in the chat box. Kayla, can you join us again? Screen is yours.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Melissa. So as we took the time to connect to another part of ourselves, and just kind of give that part space to be seen and heard, I want to take the opportunity to continue this. And everyone can ask themselves, what is one thing that I can do to honor this part of myself this week, today? And that could look very different for everyone. It could be sitting for 5 minutes and letting that part of you cry. It could be letting that part of you be angry. It could be taking a hot bath, or going for a walk in nature, sitting by the beach, or wherever makes you feel calm. And it could simply be just talking to that part of yourself, listening to it, taking some paper and just free writing, listening to what this part has to say. And so if you'd like, you can just take a moment right now and write it down, actually, and let this writing down be a commitment to yourself. Let the words that you write set the intention of really honoring yourself just a little bit more today, this week, this year. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. As we conclude, I want to remind you that Sharsheret is here for you and your loved ones during this experience, during this time, and we provide one-on-one support and programs designed to help navigate all aspects of the cancer experience. All are completely free and completely confidential. You can also email us at clinicalstaff@sharsheret.org. And finally, I want to let you know that we have several exciting webinars on a wide range of topics planned over the next few months, but later in June, we have two specific ones. We're offering a webinar on pregnancy, breastfeeding, and breast cancer, and another one on mindful breathing for stress and pain reduction. Please check out our website regularly to see what topics are coming up. And with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us and have a wonderful day.